Storytime, my best friend cheated on his girlfriend with me. So a little background information. So Gavin and I had been best friends ever since we were little. We lived in the same neighborhood, and my parents and his grandparents were pretty close, I guess. But everybody in our neighborhood was close with each other. And I always had a huge crush on him. And I would try to subtly tell him that I liked him. But he would always be like, "Ooh, don't joke with me like that. That's not true." And eventually, I just kind of got the hint that that was his way of telling me, "I don't like you. Stop before I tell you," in a mean way. So when we were in middle school, he was always having these 2-day relationships with all these girls and everything. And me, not so much, because sis didn't have a glow up until she reached her sophomore year in high school. And the thing was, I wasn't that best friend who would be like, "Ooh, don't date her, she's ugly," or anything like that. I would totally respect all of his relationships, even if they were 2 days long. But he would literally still block me. Well, the one day we were hanging out at his house, for part 2. About how my best friend cheated on his girlfriend with me. So like I said, the one night I was at his house and he was on my phone and he was asking me who all these guys were on my Snapchat. And I told him that I had been talking to them and he was just being super toxic. He was talking shit on every single one of them. So eventually I started dating this guy Trey, and after that he texted me saying that I was gross and everything else, when the next day he literally got a girlfriend. But weirdly enough, he didn't block me that time. He actually started texting me more, saying how him and his girlfriend were so happy together, da-da-da-da-da. And unlike him, I would be supportive. Well, the one night at 2 a.m., he came over my house and he was like, "I don't have feelings for my girlfriend." And I'm like, "Okay, then why are you with her?" And then he has the nerve to say, "Don't you get that I like you?" Really? Well, eventually we cut off all communication and he was still with this girl. Well, the one night he asked me to come over and talk, and we ended up doing the nasty. And then he blocked me on everything after he said we should both leave our girlfriends and boyfriends. Well, I ended up telling his girlfriend what we did, and they also come to my family cookouts.
Storytime about how my neighbor killed my dog. So a little background information. When I was about 3 years old, my parents got me a German Shepherd. And my neighbors who lived next to us absolutely loved our dog. And so did their kids. Their dad literally put a doggy door in the fence, so that way our dog could go back and forth from our house to his house. Well, when I was about 8 years old, my neighbors decided to sell their house. So he told us that he had to take out the doggy door because the people that were buying his house hated animals. Well, the people who had just bought his house, they ended up moving in before he could take out the doggy door. So our new neighbors asked us if we could put a piece of plywood in front of the door so that way our dog couldn't get through. And they said that they would do the same to their side of the fence. So my dad said, yeah, he put a piece of plywood in front of there. Well, my dog, Gabe, the one night that my brother let him out, he ended up getting the plywood off of the doggy door. Well, my brother literally had to crawl through the doggy door to get the dog before one of them saw him in the yard. For part 2 about how my neighbors killed my dog. So like I said, my brother let the dog out, and my dog got the piece of plywood off of the door. And my brother had to crawl through the doggy door to get my dog out of our neighbor's yard, so that way our neighbors wouldn't wake up and know that he got through. But whenever my brother went to go get Gabe, he realized that my neighbors didn't even have a piece of plywood on their side of the fence or anything. So my brother told my dad, and my dad went over there the next day to talk to them. And he pretty much said, "I'm not going to have a piece of fucking plywood on my side of the fence if you're not going to be doing anything on yours to prevent my dog from going into your yard." And they were like, "Oh, well, your old neighbors never took out the doggy door." And my dad was like, "That's not our fucking fault." Well, then our new neighbors said, "If your dog all of a sudden becomes sick or just does not come back, don't be surprised." My dad decided to replace the door himself. Well, once Gabe realized that the doggy door was gone, when we would let him outside, he would literally just sit there and bark at the fence. Well, 2 weeks later, Gabe ended up passing away, and we found out it's because our neighbors were giving him rat poison. Storytime about how I was dating the school shooter. Yeah. So a little background information. I was a sophomore whenever this all happened, and it was around October. Well, the one day I was sitting at lunch with my group of friends. We're all sitting there having a good time when one of my friends dares me to go over and sit with this one kid. And he was sitting alone. He was kind of shy. And of course I did, because they had offered me $10, guys. Can't beat that. So I go over there, we start talking, and I realize that he's actually really nice. And he's really hot. I never really saw what he looked like because he was always wearing hoodies during school. Anyways, we started hanging out more, and eventually he said that he liked me and we started dating. The relationship seemed pretty perfect. Well, 6 months in, I think he started to trust me more, because he had told me about this one group of girls that he absolutely hated. This group of girls just happened to be my friends. I didn't tell him that I was friends with these girls because they were considered controversial, for part 2. Part 2 about how I was dating the school shooter. Like I said, I had never told him that I was friends with these girls because they were controversial, but he would go on for hours about how much he hated these girls. He went as far to say that he wanted to kill them. I didn't think anything of it at first, because him and I had more of a sarcastic sense of humor, but he started to sound more and more serious every time that he would talk about it. Well, after us dating for 10 months, he calls me the one night, and he starts telling me about how he's going to shoot up the school. He had told me his entire plan of how he was going to do this. Now, he must have thought that we were like ride or die relationship, when in reality, I was recording everything that he was saying. After we got off the phone, I wrote an email to all of the office staff in my school, but I fell asleep and never finished the email. I woke up the next morning, finished it. I had texted my friends not to go to school that day. I had already missed the bus. I rode my bike to school that day. I ran to the principal's office, nobody was there, and that's whenever I heard shots in the hallway. Story time about why I beat up my best friend. So a little background information. Her and I had been best friends since we were in 7th grade. Her family was rich, mine was poor, and at first she was a really good friend. She was always there for me whenever I needed her, until our freshman year of high school, which is when her and I started hanging out with boys. Now, my mom was kind of strict. She wouldn't really let me hang out with boys, but her mom was more lenient about her hanging out with boys. Every weekend she would throw a party at her house, and she would throw them in her attic because 1, it was huge, and 2, her parents didn't give a fuck what she did up there. Anyways, she would always offer to do my hair and makeup before the party started, which always made me really excited because I never really put any work into my physical appearance. Well, little did I know, the only reason why she would offer to do my hair and makeup at these parties was so that way she could make me look like shit in front of all the boys. So after that, I taught myself how to do my own makeup and do my own hair, like for part 2. Part 2 about why I beat up my best friend. So like I said, I learned how to do my hair and makeup, and she went on vacation for like a month straight. Well, when she came home, she threw another party, and she was like, don't worry, after I'm done getting ready, I'll do your makeup and do your hair. And I was like, no, it's fine, I got it. She literally looks at me and she goes, are you sure? You don't really know how to do that. Like, it'll probably look really bad. And I'm like, why the fuck would you say that? She goes, no, like, I don't mean it to be rude. It's just that, like, I want you to look good in front of the boys and stuff like that. Like, sis tried to talk me into getting a shower for a full, like, 20 minutes. So after that, the whole night, she's literally being a pick-me girl. She's making all these comments about me in front of the boys, and I just keep brushing them off until her next party. We got ready, and I put on these expensive shoes that I had just bought, and she goes, wow, you just, like, really like to copy my style, don't you? So she starts making comments that whole night about how my family's poor and stuff like that, and she threw up all over my shoes. So I dumped the trash can that everybody had threw up in that night on her, punched her in the face, but like 2 months later, she came to my house and apologized. Story time about my boyfriend's crazy ex-girlfriend. So a little background information. So his ex-girlfriend's parents, they owned a security company, which sold cameras, alarms, and a few other things. So at the end of 2019, my boyfriend broke up with his ex-girlfriend. And by March of 2020, he started seeing me. And at first, we were just keeping things on the down low. Anyways, so after maybe 3 weeks of seeing my boyfriend, his ex sent me an Instagram message calling me a slut. It's the obsession for me. Anyways, what's even weirder is that she knew everything about my boyfriend and I, even the sexual things. Anyways, like I said, I thought that was really weird, so everything that she had sent me, I sent straight to him. Because I thought, obviously, that he had still been talking to her and had told her everything about us. But instantly, he gave me his phone and said go through it, and he had her blocked on everything. So even though it was weird, we moved on from that situation. Well, fast forward another 2 weeks, and his ex calls him while I'm at his house. Like for part 2. Part 2 about my boyfriend's crazy ex-girlfriend. So like I said, she had called him while I was over his house. And somehow she keeps figuring out things about our sex life and personal things that we had told each other. So my boyfriend and I got super suspicious, obviously. Then we started to think, and we noticed that everything that she was telling us were things that we had talked about in his bedroom. And things that we had done. So we ransacked his whole room looking for anything. And what do you know, I found a mini security camera and a microphone pointing out of his walk-in wardrobe directly towards the bed. He took it to the police and tracked it back to her. So it turns out she had used the hidden spare key, which his mom kept under the mat at the front door, which she had known about from when they dated. So she broke into his house, planted a security camera from her dad's business in his wardrobe. So we decided not to press charges because her parents and my boyfriend's parents were friends. So they just talked it out and decided to punish her in their own way. Story time about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So a little background information. This had all started as soon as my dad left my mom and I. I was like 13 around the time. Well, ever since then, my mom would have different guys in and out of the house all the time. Like, we were lucky if a month went by and she was still with the same dude. Which, I mean, I kinda get it because my dad did leave us for a woman that he had started another family with. But at the same time, it was just a whole mess. Anyway, so she had got with this new guy and we're gonna call him Tyler. And by the way, the dudes that she would date, they would literally live at our house. Anyway, so a week after he moved in, I started getting really close to him, which usually never happens. Usually I would try to keep my distance because I knew how wrong it was of her having all these different guys in the house when I'm only 16. Anyways, every time that my mom would go to work, he would invite me to go see a movie and he would just be really flirty with me. And he was only 6 years older than me. And my mom was 32. You do the math. Anyways, like for part 2. Part 2 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, the guy was being super flirty with me, inviting me to the movies when my mom wasn't home and all that stuff. Well, then it led to more than just that. By the way, this guy did not have a job, so he was home with me 24/7. And I was doing online school. So we were in the house by ourselves, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Anyways, like I said, it led to more and we started doing the nasty and stuff. Ew, just, yeah. Well, the one day after we got done doing the nasty in my mom's room, we had fell asleep. And yes, we did not have clothes on. Well, at 2 in the morning, I hear someone pounding on the bedroom door. And my mom worked night shifts. So we get up, he hurries up and gets dressed and tells me to hide under the bed. And he opens the door and it's my mom's sister. My sister literally lived in the apartment next door. And she was like, oh yeah, neither of you were answering the phone. So she wanted me to check on you guys. Like, where's Elena? And I'm still under the bed naked, like for part 3.
Storytime about how I found out that my boyfriend was trying to get with another girl on Valentine's Day. Okay, there's a lot that goes into this story time, so let me break it down for you real quick. I was a sophomore and my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 4 months now. And he was a junior. Well, there was this girl that he was for some reason obsessed with in his Spanish class. She was a freshman. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, well, how did you know he was obsessed with her? Well, he would Snapchat this girl 24/7. Even his friends told me he was obsessed with her. So I talked to him and I told him I was uncomfortable with how much he was talking to this girl. And he said, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I'll block her. Now, I didn't ask him to do that, but it made me feel more confident in how he felt about me. Well, Valentine's Day comes around. And we didn't talk all day until he came to pick me up. I wished him a happy Valentine's Day and got left undelivered. So we get to the restaurants and we decide to put our phones at the end of the table so that way we would be more focused on each other. Well, he goes to the bathroom and then I see this name pop up on his phone. Like for part 2.
Part 2. So, like I said, I saw this name on his phone, and there was something special about this name. So, whenever I kept streaks, I would put the word streak, and then an emoji, and then the person's name. And he got the idea that instead of keeping her name, he would put it as streak. So I was like, that's really fucking weird. And at first I was like, what the fuck? So I opened his phone, and what do you know? It's from that girl. And she was replying back to a big paragraph that he sent her. And we had school that same day. So at 6:30 in the morning, this girl got a big paragraph from my boyfriend about how she's such a beautiful, amazing girl and that she deserves somebody who's gonna take her out and buy her flowers and stuff. And how if she wanted to go out to dinner, let him know. He took an extremely long time in the bathroom, so the waiter came to our table. So I ordered $300 worth of food for myself. So when he came back, I told him that I had to go call my mom, and I left. And he was stuck with a $400 bill.
Story time about my worst trip off LSD. So one of the kids in my friend group was about to leave for Arizona. And we would always talk about how we need to trip together before he leaves. And anytime that I would trip off acid, I would go to my one plug. Well, he ran out, so we had to go to somebody else. And I've never tried this kid's stuff before. But I just said, fuck it, YOLO. Which should not have been my motto at the time. But it was. So that night, we're in the car, and one of our friends is driving because he's sober, obviously. And before I put the tab on my tongue, I started to get really nervous. And I have never felt like that before I've taken acid. But I kind of just said fuck it, and I put it on my tongue. So we go pick up 2 more people that I'm not really close with. So then we make our way over to our other friend's apartment. And I'm kind of feeling it, but not really. But then as soon as we walk into that apartment, I start tripping balls. And you know, everything was going good. But then my dumb ass decided to look in the fucking mirror. And as soon as I look in the mirror, I see myself smile back at me, like for part 2.
Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I looked back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, "Do you want to leave now?" And I just shook my head, yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3. Okay, part 3. So like I said, I walked in and she knew that something was wrong with me right away. Because she was like, "Oh, I have a letter from your boyfriend." And usually I would run up, grab it, read it really quickly. Because I would only get like 1 letter a week. But instead I ran downstairs because her face was fucking melting. So 5 minutes later, she has to come downstairs and help me get dressed into my pajamas because I forgot how to dress myself. I didn't want to be left alone that night, so my friend stayed in the basement with me. So he went and tried to go to sleep. But he couldn't because I was watching Butterfly Effect for 8 hours straight. Like, that was the only thing that could calm me down. But I still don't even know all the freaking words to it, which is weird. Like, he would try to change the video and somehow I end up back to Butterfly Effect. And then he tried to kiss me. So he left the next morning because he had to go to work, which was at like 11 a.m. And I took this tab at 8 p.m. the day before. So I was getting texts like, "Where are you? You're supposed to be home now." So I had to go home and act normal in front of everybody while I'm still tripping balls. And I also got grounded for coming home late because I could not come home at the right time because I was tripping so hard. And this lasted for about 24 hours. Crazy story time about how my mom kidnapped my sister. So my mom and dad split whenever I was really young. And at this time, they were always in and out of court battling for custody over my sister and I. Well, the one day my dad drives my mom downtown to the courthouse because she didn't have a ride. And before she gets out of the car, she's like, "Can I give the girls a hug?" And my dad was like, "Yeah, go ahead." Little background information. I was more of a daddy's girl. My sister was more of a mommy's girl. Which is probably the reason why she took her. I was sitting by the window, my sister was sitting in the middle seat. So she gives me a hug. Next thing I know, my sister's seatbelt was unbuckled and my mom was running across the street with her in the middle of downtown. Didn't even look for cars. So my dad got out of the car, ran over, grabbed her, picked both of them up and walked over to the sidewalk and my mom was screaming bloody murder. So this guy called the cops and my dad was trying to show them custody papers because he had full custody. But the cop knew my mom, so he let her take my sister. We got her back, but I didn't see this bitch for like 4 months. Toxic best friend story time. So I had an off and on friendship with this one girl. In my freshman year, we became friends again. And she had this boyfriend named Nicholas. And they literally fought 24/7. And every time she would fight, she would be like, "Can you please fix this for me?" So she would have me add him on Snapchat, fix it, and then block him. And guys, this literally was happening like 5 times a week. And then after she asked me to do that the first few times, I realized she started going through my phone. And when I say my phone, I mean my whole motherfucking phone. A bitch was going through my Snapchats, DMs, text messages, and I didn't know how to confront her because that's just weird. So the one day I was getting ready at her house because we were about to go out, and she was like, "I'm grounded, can I use your phone real quick?" And I was like, "Yeah, just let me Snapchat this last person back." And she goes, "No," and rips the phone out of my hand. And she starts going through my Snapchat right in front of me. And I had a streak with this kid named Nick. She goes up to me and says, "What the fuck is this?" Like for part 2. Story time about how my boyfriend was cheating on me with my stepsister. So a little background information. My mom remarried whenever I was in 8th grade. And my stepdad had 2 daughters. One which was my age and we got along really well. Well, before my sisters and I went back to school, my mom wanted to go on a camping trip with everyone. And my boyfriend was coming because he was really close with my family. So while my stepsister and I are packing up, she starts acting really weird. And we're gonna call my boyfriend Kevin. She was like, "Oh, is Kevin still coming with us?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then she goes, "Oh, are you and Kevin still together?" And I'm like, "We were never broken up. Like, the fuck?" Like I said, she was just being super fucking weird. But anyways, we all get in the car, we drive up there, and her and Kevin start being super weird around each other. Like, they were being too touchy. Anytime that I wanted to go do something with Kevin, she would say, "Oh, Kevin, you can come do this instead." Well, that night, Kevin and I are sleeping in our tent. At least I thought he was. And I wake up to some loud noises in the other tent, like for part 2.
Part 2. So like I said, I heard a bunch of noises and talking in my stepsister's tent, and I wake up and my boyfriend isn't in the tent. So I'd be very quiet getting out of my tent, and I go over to hers and I just listen. And oh bitch, I should have just confronted them because I got my motherfucking feelings hurt. He was telling her how he didn't love me at all and how he only wanted to be with her, and how every time that they kissed each other and screwed each other, he felt such a connection between them. So not only was he cheating physically, but they had a connection. Wonderful. So I open her tent and I confront them. This was the most degrading thing I've ever went through in my life. And I said, I heard you guys outside. And I'm just not the type of girl who's going to come at another girl because my man wants her. Because at that point, he's not my man. She goes, sit down, sweetie, we need to talk. Apparently they're in love. So they started dating. They're still dating. And my parents allowed it. So I distanced myself from all of them.
Story time about the girl who used me to get with my guy best friend. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 9th grade. Well, at the end of summer, right before school started, this girl named Liv added me on Snapchat. And I had seen her all around school. She was very popular and a little bit stuck up. But I added her back and then I got a call on Snapchat from her. I answer very awkwardly and I'm like, hi. And then she was like, oh, I've seen you in a lot of this guy's pictures. Are you guys like best friends? And I'm like, yeah, sort of. And she goes, have you ever thought about dating him? It was just an extremely weird out of nowhere conversation. Anyway, so fast forward 2 weeks, I walk in the first day of school with my best friend Tommy. And Tommy and I have like every single class together. For some reason, Liv thought that we were friends and she would come and go as she pleased. Like Tommy and I would be standing at my locker. She would come over. Anyways, fast forward to chemistry. She walks in the class, winks at Tommy, like for part 2. Part 2 about the girl who used me to get with my guy best friend. So like I said, we were in chemistry. She walks in and she winks at Tommy. And I look over real quick and I realize that her nails were vermilion. That's Tommy's favorite color. And by the way, like I said before, I did not know this girl at all. We had never hung out. She never talked to me before this. Not to mention, anytime that her and I talked, she would only talk about Tommy. Fast forward a couple days, we're in chemistry, and somehow she got her assigned seat next to me. And she was like, hey, do you want to study for the chemistry test together? And I was kind of excited because I thought that I had a new best friend. So I said, yeah. Later on, she comes to my house. I never told her an address or anything like that, so I was very creeped out about how she knew my address. We studied for the test, and she goes, hey, do you want to hang out with Tommy and a few other guys tomorrow? Well, tomorrow was the day that I was going out of town. So she goes, okay, maybe next week. After being out of town, I came back on a Saturday, and the next day I get a text from Tommy, like for part 3. Part 3 about the girl who used me to get with my guy best friend. So like I said, she asked me if I wanted to hang out with Tommy and a few other guys. I told her that I was going out of town. When I got back from out of town, the next day I get a text from Tommy. He was flipping out on me. He said that I was talking shit about him to Liv. And apparently I said that I was happy that his mother died. And a bunch of other bullshit. Well, after that, Tommy cut me off, so I was lonely, and I started hanging out with Liv more, even though she said that terrible stuff to Tommy and made him cut me off. So fast forward a year, he is a new best friend, right? I get a DM from her on Instagram saying like, hey, did Tommy used to be your best friend? Pretty much everybody knew what happened between me and Tommy, but she was like, that girl that you're best friends with is dating him now. And then he completely cut me off. So technically, she used both her and I to get with Tommy. But after dating for literally like 2 months, he cheated on her because she slept with 5 other guys. Story time about how I found out that my mom was sleeping with my history teacher to get me better grades. So it was my junior year of high school. And everybody knows that your junior year is the most important year of high school. If you didn't, well, now you know. My brother was in his senior year of high school. And when he was a junior, he had the same teacher. So he knew how hard the class was. So he would stay up with me every night helping me to pass my history class. Well, the one day I'm at school and I'm taking a test, and I literally did not know anything on the test. And I studied the night before for literally 4 hours straight. So I decided to copy off the girl next to me. Well, a few days later, we get our test back. And I'm looking at mine, and I got a 97%. And then I look over to the girl next to me. She got a 33%. And then I started going through the tests. None of the essay questions looked like my handwriting. But I didn't say anything because I wanted that A. Well, the one night, I'm sitting down with my family having dinner. And I told them that I copied off the girl next to me. And how I got a 97% and she got a 33%. And my brother flips out like for part 2. Part 2 of my mom sleeping with my history teacher to get me better grades.
So like I said, I told my parents that I got a 97, she got a 33. And I was telling them how the handwriting didn't even look like mine and everything. And then my brother starts flipping out. In front of my dad, too. He goes, Mom, are you fucking serious? You couldn't let her try and do this on her own? And I was super confused. Like, I thought that maybe he was talking about my mom paid off the teacher. But then he said, yeah, Dad, if you didn't know, Mom's been fucking our history teacher to get us better grades. And then he goes, Mom, you're such a fucking whore. And my mom's sitting there not even fazed. She just took a drink of her wine and said, get the fuck upstairs now. Before my brother leaves the table, he goes, maybe you can fuck Dad's boss too. Maybe he'll get a raise. And then I realized what was happening. And it's around 6:30 p.m. So after that, a lot of stuff happened. My dad obviously wanted to get a divorce at that point. So my dad took my brother and I to our grandparents. And we stayed with them for like 2 weeks. But then everybody at school found out. And we got made fun of a lot. And then after that, we moved schools.